What's up everyone and welcome back to the replay review on Replay Works. So, you go away for a weekend and you come back and you find out that Blue-Green won yet another big event. In this case, it's going to be the Eagle's Nest Webcam Locals that they host every Wednesday. And this is interesting because we talked about Blue-Green at Gen Con, we see Blue-Green again, I myself am a Blue-Green player, right? So we're starting to see this meta call pickup where it's a little bit more geared towards aggro. So I'm definitely excited to look into what deck lists we're going to see today. We're going to see how the builds are. We're doing some of the usual analysis as well. But, you know, let's kick things off, right? Let's start pretty simple. Let's just take a look at the top 8, right? Now, a couple things about the Eagle's Nest locals is that it is worldwide, right? As you can see, we have some folks from, I believe that's Brazil, Europe, Canada, US, right? There are people playing from all over the world on this locals, which is great because that means we get to experience how other people in other countries' metas are progressing, not just our own North America meta, right? And that could be different because let's say you go into a regional and someone from out of town travels in, they're going to be running a completely different meta. They're going to be having texts that are different meta calls than what we've developed over here and what we covered in a lot of the other channels as well, right? So keep that in mind. It's very interesting. I think this type of country diversity really helps out the game, and also like to understand that different people from different areas are going to be playing different decks, right? So anyway, with the top 8, we got, of course, our winners, our 1 Year War Rush deck, and I'm so happy to see that name is starting to stick with this type of archetype, if you will, where it's running Char, it's running Amuro, the quote-unquote main characters of the 1 Year War, and seeing that as the main name is making me a little warm and fuzzy inside, since it's a pretty catchy name, right? All right, second place we got an other list. We'll talk about that one later, but just a heads up, it is a blue-white list, but it's not what we've seen with the usual freedom blockers, with the freedom or the freedom plus unicorn combo, right? It's a little bit different. We're gonna take a look at that later. Then we have our usual suspects, our white-green wing ramp. We see a white-green operation meteor deck, which I would assume that they're playing Shenlong and Wu Fei instead of playing the blockers and stuff like that in the main deck, right? So then of course we have the unicorn control, usual suspects popping around, right? All right, so that's our top 8. So in terms of the color combinations, I took the top 16. Now the best part about the Eagle's Nest locals is that essentially I get to have every deck list available. But for brevity's sake, I do only take the top 16, just because like top 8 I feel is a little bit too little. Top 16 gives me a good range of guys that were playing, let's say, off meta stuff, right? We see a red-white, we see red-blue. Those did not make top 8, but those are in top 16. So it kind of gives me a little bit of that diversity of what decks that could have made top 8, whether it be an X2 record. Maybe that's why they didn't make top 8, right? Just because of tiebreakers. So it gives me a lot more information to work with. Okay, so out of the overall top 16 list, we see blue-white. We have six decks there. 3 green-whites. We cover those in the top 8. We have the 2 green-blues that are both in the top 8, first place and I believe 6. We have red-white and red-blue, which we will do an honorable mention at the end for these 2 colors. And we have a mono-white deck. And that one, it's going to be the last deck I cover, and I'm really excited to talk about that one at the very end. It's a very creative list. I call it mono-white because it has 4 blue cards, and the rest, and the other 46 cards are all white, so by my definition, I'm going to go ahead and just say that anything that has 90% of a color is going to be that color, quote-unquote, mono color. And the other 10, it's like, it would be a little bit disingenuous to include it as a blue-white deck when it's running nothing the same as a regular blue-white deck. So, that's just a quick aside on that one. So, going in, we see the colors played. We see 12 white, 11 blue, 6 red, 5 green. The red is interesting because as we progress through the meta, and we've seen the blue-white ramp see a lot of play, we've seen the the blue-white control deck see a lot of play, especially from the beginning. Red is interesting to me because we didn't see it too often. Red is, I originally thought and viewed it as the weakest color. Red primarily has the Cyber New type archetype, it has the Zaft archetype, which we're going to start to see pop up as we hit an aggro meta, where we start to see the rise of Blue-Green, rise of Zeon Rush, or even Federation Rush, where I've been told, and kind of got my face punched in by Darren, that Zaft in the builds itself can essentially combat the meta depending on what type of ratios they play, but it's very precise in terms of their deck building. So we'll have to talk about that as we get to talk about the Zaft deck later on. Now, aside from that, we also have the Cyber New types, which I feel like it's fallen out of favor just a little bit on just by looking at these numbers, looking at the results. But I still think it's a strong contender overall, and we know that Eggman was able to win an event at Gen Con with it, so I still believe that that's a strong contender. I think it's just for now, it's just in a lull period. I think green-white ring ramp and blue-white blockers are still going to be very prevalent right now. But again, as we see more and more rush and aggro decks come out, I believe the mid-range decks are going to come out to be able to keep those in check. And that's where I believe red is in this meta. So, before we talk about the decks, let's look at the overall stat lines, right? And just for reference, I like looking at the stat lines from a holistic standpoint from all the deck lists, even though some decks might be have access to different stat lines and stuff like that if they're aggro or control. But it just gives me a good trend of like seeing how, like, where the AP on each level is, especially if you don't know what type of deck you're playing against, just the general numbers, right? You see, in this case, level 2s, right? Level 2s, 2.2 AP, 2 HP, right? So you know that, okay, you want to try to aim for anything that has 3 HP to 3 or 4 HP around that time just to have something live. You know that 2, it's a relevant number. That can be something where you're going to end up being trading off with your 2/2s into that field, right? And then you have your level 3s and your level 4s. Level 4, as you can see, is starting to creep up to 3.6, so it's almost at 4 right there. You know, Star Deck Gundam comes to mind as a predominant 3/4 stat line. So just knowing these numbers, it helps a little bit just to keep a track of where you're deck building and what to expect on certain turns. Now, naturally, pilots do get to mess around with these numbers starting from turn 3, turn 4. But I think as the game develops, as we get more cards in the card pool, we're gonna we want to see where these numbers are at. Again, especially if you're going to a tournament, you don't know what your opponent's playing, just to have a general sense of what to expect during each turn. Alright? So, first deck. We got the first place deck coming up. This is our 1-year war rush, and it's a very clean list, right? Now, it's very similar to the list that Top Gen Con, in the sense that they're running gun tanks, G fighters, right? Gun tank, I gushed about extensive, like that tech is amazing. But the difference between those decks and this deck is that this deck is still focusing mostly on the Char package, right? While it does have that Zeon element in it with the Zaku's, Zaku 1, 2, and the other 2. All right. The focus on having a gun tank as an early drop means that you can kind of combo in with G Fighter to give it high mobility on the next following turn, right? And I think that's pretty good tech from there. Aside from that, we have usual suspects like Goof, we have Famel as well, that generate tokens from the field depending on what turn. I think Goof is a really good going first card. You get to keep up that momentum, especially if you go turn 1 Dop, turn 2 double Zaku, turn 3 Goof. You have it's like 5 units essentially. So you get to keep the momentum up, right? And now I'm very curious. I want to see what happens when you take the Zeon side of this color combination versus the Federation side. It's a little bit of a interesting narrative from there, right? But yeah. Again, we're going to start seeing these color combinations pop up hopefully a lot more as we progress through the meta. Now, the 6th place deck. This one's interesting. It's got a lot of one-of techs that we didn't see in the list, right? Big Zam is one. Citizens Take a Stand is another one. Fortress Defense is another one, right? And there's some cards here that I'm familiar with, like Makuve and the Vanilla Gelgoog. Now, I feel that this deck the ratios. This is very like this. You see a lot of 3s, you see a lot of 2s. It's very, I don't want to say all over the place. I feel like there's got to be specific reasons for running specific ratios, right? For example, the Sharazaku 2, the LR from the Star deck, he's only running 3. Normally, I would feel that this is like 4 of in the deck, but given the amount of, like, there's about 11 pilots, 3 bases, it's 14 plus 7, so that's like, what, 21 cards of your deck aren't Zeon off the bat. Oh, 23 if you count the Gundam. So this one's interesting. I think Big Zam going along with Fortress Defense is a good one of tech, where you can eventually pop out Big Zam, maybe give him Rush with Fortress Defense, or rather pair him with Dolza from the Fortress Defense command card. But still, Fortress Defense is a good card where you get the two tokens as well. Citizens Take a Stand is interesting to me because you get to play this on turn 4, and what that means is that, let's say you go turn 1, Dop, turn 2, double Zaku, right? Turn 3, you drop a Char, Zaku, or the Goof, right? So let's say you drop the Goof, had the optimal setup. Turn 4, you have 5 units, and you still technically have 3 resources left over to pair a Char Zaku, or the Gelgoog with Makube or Char himself. So, I think it stands interesting. It's an interesting one of, I want to keep an eye on this card. I want to see if we're going to see more aggro decks that end up like maxing this out for whatever reason, and then committing to that turn 4, 5 guys on the field, everything swings type strategy. Yeah, it's one of those things that I can see it work in the deck, and I'm so curious if they're able to pull off that turn 5 perfect, everything gets destroyed play. But let's look at the averages, right? Let's look at some of the cards and some numbers and some graphs. So for me, for this green-blue type meta, since there's a lot of creativity in terms of how many pilots you can play, what commands, what kind of bases you're playing, the units is where I really care about. I want to know how many units this deck is expected to run. In this case, it's 34, 35, so upwards of around that number. Now, I feel that in this type of rush deck, you got to play enough units to push damage through. Without enough units, you know, your Sharazaku 2 is going to be whiffing. You're not going to be able to keep up the momentum later on in the game, right? And especially when we look at some of the ratios, right, from the 1s and 2s, you got to make sure that you have a really strong early game, especially when you are going first. You want to be able to put guys on the board just to be able to start swinging in as early as possible, especially when other decks, they start to curve out around 2 and 3, right? And they don't even have blockers at that point. Mostly, if they're playing like Zawar, that's functionally, if they went second, they can only play it at the same time they play Lifrit because it costs 2 resources. They're not going to be playing it on their first turn. They have to play it when they're at level 3. At that point, they might just play Lifrit. So, quick aside. From here, I like looking at also the, aside from the units, pilots. Pilots is an interesting ratio. We see one deck that has 8, one deck that has 11. There's a lot of good choices here between not just playing Char and Amuro. You can play cards like Makuve or cards like Sailor, depending on what your unit lineup is, right? If you go heavy on Zeon and you play the Gelgoog, that's vanilla, Makuve is a good choice. If you go heavy on the white base side, then Sailor is an excellent choice as well, since they both come in around the same time. And then we have decks that are playing 3 bases. I think that's kind of what our standard is going to be from here on out. It really depends on like what base, right? We saw one deck that has Corsica, we saw one deck that has Famel. It just depends on what flavor token you want to produce, right? They're both, in my opinion, very good. It's just a matter of like what the rest of the deck curves out look like. Okay, and then we have the average cards, right? As I mentioned, a lot of 1s and 2s and 3s, that's where the primary core is, and the 4s is where things start to fall off. That's where your Gelgoogs and your Gundams come in. And then if they're playing Big Zam, that's like the outlier number, right? But you know that starting on level 3, that's when they can start to pair off Char and get that high mobility swing in. Level 4 is when the deck starts to turn on and try to go for game at that point, assuming that they were able to get an early turn 1, turn 2 setup, right? Because turn 4 allows them to play Amuro and the Gundam, or allows them to even play the Gelgoog if their Char somehow got popped the previous turn, right? So to really, like, this deck is not meant to last long. You're not supposed to go into time with this deck. You're supposed to go in, go fast, try to win as early as possible before anyone else can hit their stride. Okay? So, now I've got the unit breakdowns in terms of the stat lines. Again, a little bit on the weaker side just because of how we see that they're playing the 1-2 Zaku, they're playing Dop, they're playing the 1-2 level 1 drop, right? And then the level 3s, those are looking at your Shah or Zaku 2s, right? And those are 3-2 stat lines. All those still kind of stay here as like they're on the squishier side. That's why I think, you know, red blue should be popping up eventually to counter this type of deck. But they're there. They're not there to live on the field. They're literally just there to go in, go fast, and the usual metaphors, right? Yeah, so just remember that, like, the deck curves out around 4 HP. Naturally, the 4 HP only really comes from Star Deck Gundam and Char's Gelgoog. Everything else is going to have 2, maybe 3 HP if you pair it off. Nothing, like, aside from the regular Gelgoog, nothing's going to have 3 HP natively, right? Now, 3 HP is going to be important, right? Because as we continue on the list, we're going to look at the white-green lists. Right now, we're returning to tradition. Now, the deck that got 3rd and the deck that got 5th, these decks are at, let me just toggle between them, right? They're very similar. As you can see, the card choices are roughly the same. The only difference is that one deck is playing Perfect Strike, the other deck is not. But the ratios are way different. And just toggle it for a couple more times. We see, like, the Wing Gundam 0, the 8-drop, the Death Scythe. One deck is playing maxed out copies at 4, the other deck is playing maxed out copies, or they're not maxing out, they're playing 3. And they're also only playing 3 Path of Victory Defeat. The difference, there's also like difference between like Ale Strike is being played at 2 on this list versus 3 on this list. So it's an interesting choice. I think we're at the point where we're tuning the numbers to make it feel more consistent and not like you're getting stuck with, you know, 4 Death Sights in your hand all the time, or you're getting stuck with the Wing Gundam 0 all the time. I think that's what we're gonna see with these lists going forward. Again, these 2 lists out of the 2 lists out of the 3 that topped 16, these aren't even playing Shenlong, which I also think is interesting. It's more defensively, so we're starting to go back to that side as well. Now, I want to talk about First Contact here. First Contact is in both of these lists at 2 of, so I think we've kind of solidified that you play 4 Bird Mode, 2 First Contact, just to maximize your chances of seeing a ramp card without having to max out on First Contact itself. Now, I think that's a pretty good choice. I think 6 is a good enough number, especially when, you know, you draw 5 opening, 6 shields. That's, what, 39 cards left in deck, right? Just being able to try to see it in the first 3 turns is pretty good. Yeah, and then the last card I want to talk about in general is the Path to Victory or Defeat. This is the only search card in the game exists for Operation Meteor cards. It searches the pilot and it searches the unit, and it also checks top 5, which is huge because at that point in the game, let's see, that should be about, what, 15, 16 cards gone from your deck, assuming you didn't play Overflowing Affection earlier. So you're, what, 35 cards, 34 cards left in the deck, which means that you're checking a 1/7 of your deck for any of these high drops, right? And these high drops are going to come in the turn after you play this, right? Because what happens is that you go and play Bird Mode or First Contact, you go from 3, you skip 4, next turn you go to 5, right? So you go to 5, Path to Victory Defeat already sets you up to start playing. If you dig for Death Scythe, you get Death Scythe, or the missing pilot that you need for the deck. So it's a huge component part. I think it's similar to playing Reinforcements of the Army in Yu-Gi-Oh!, where if we had access to 3 Reinforcements of the Army in Yu-Gi-Oh!, we'd play 3 and we wouldn't need to play as many of the other cards as well. But you know, Yu-Gi-Oh!'s a different beast just because you can play the first card in the game. But I think it's a similar concept where playing 3 or 4 of these means that maybe you can tone down just a little bit on the higher end cards to make space for other cards that are like on the lower end, right? As we see from this 5th place deck, right? It's playing 3 Death Scythe, 3 Wing 0, and I think that's a good choice because you have the card that searches. Man, I really hope that's like the real reason, and not because it was accessibility. I really hate for any of my speculation to be because of accessibility, because that's such a depressing thing to like know that someone couldn't get all 4 cards and they only had to play 3, but they still made 5th. It's still a good placement for them. Tangent aside, we got the breakdowns. Now again, these lists are gonna be super clean just because I think we're just tuning ratios here and there. We got 26 units, 10 commands, 10 pilots, 4 bases, right? 4 bases always being the 06. We haven't seen any deviations. I did see one list and one post on the main Facebook group about someone playing the school academy that lets you like check top, which is pretty cool. But for the most part, we're going to see the 06 base just kind of be consistent in this type of deck. It does help in the mirror also because these cards, even with Wu Fei, they only have Breach 5, so they can't break the base just by having Breach on it. They have to use a second attack. Yeah, and then 10 commands, I think that's also solidifying as well. Like, Overflowing Affection, First Contact, and your Searcher card. I think you're pretty much settled on those 3. It's just a matter of like which one's gonna have the 4, which is gonna have the 3s. And then 10 pilots. 10 pilots. We got the Kiras, we got heroes, and we got duos. And the heroes are gonna be maxed out. So I think that's also starting to solidify as well. So it's really gonna come down to where is the units in all this, how those measure up. Okay. Now, average cards per level. Yeah, again, because we know how the deck runs, there's no turn 4 play. Because they skip 4, they go to 5, so everything's concentrated on 5 being searchers, and then you go to 6 where everything starts to come out and play and start wrecking face, right? So, yeah, I think that's also going to be roughly the same from what we're going to see week on week. And last but not least, your AP, HP breakdowns. Yeah, pretty much no changes, really. You're going to have Lifrits, Swords. I think those are pretty standard low-end curves. We got the Bird on turn 3. We have Ale Strike, Perfect Strike, depending on which one is ratio in the deck, right? I think between those two, we're also going to see maybe Perfect Strike gets a little bit more love if we're in a token-heavy meta, if we see more Famils come out. But I think like having those 2, you can't go wrong either way, depending on which one you pick. And then yeah, we got your 8, your only 8, and your 6, right? The 6 is going to be split between the starter deck Wing Gundam, which is kind of a misnomer because when you pair him off with Hero, he becomes a 7/7, which is like huge for that point of the game. Then you have Death Scythe and as well from there. And Death Scythe's mainly just there to be paired with Duo. All right, so from here, let's talk blue-white, and this is where I can talk a lot more about because we're starting to see blue-white evolve. What do I mean by this? Now, in the second place deck, there's a lot of callouts here that you didn't see in other blue-white decks. Let's start with the bases, right? Corsica base instead of the Archangel. There's no Archangel, there's only Corsica and white base. White base kind of stay the same. Corsica comes in to get another token out, gets that 4/2 Tallgeese token if it's the first, and you get the little 1/1s after that. So, in this sense, it's very heavy on aggro because, well, if you look at the rest of the list, right? This list does not play Big Freedom. It doesn't play Perfect Strike. It doesn't even play Zaward. Now, it plays Ale Strike. Ale Strike is a fantastic card. I think it's probably going to be in almost every white list, but what this deck aims to do is take blue-white and spin it on its head, where you maxed out Unicorn mode, you maxed out Benanger, you have 3 Unicorn Destroy modes. This deck is meant to be an aggro deck at its core, which I think is the first time we're seeing this for this color combination. Now, blue-white used to always just be the blocker type deck, right? Now, this deck flips that script. It says, no, what if I can just consistently get Unicorn, consistently as best as possible, consistently get Unicorn, and then have the Unicorn, Benanger, Link, draw the card, swing in, sack it, get Destroy mode out early, do it again, right? Because you're playing more than 1 or 2 Unicorn modes that we've seen in other Unicorn blockers list, the chances of being able to pull off this combo more and more happen, like, as the game progresses is much greater, right? And you're playing cards that you dig, right? You're playing Overflowing Affection, you're playing Short Resolve that you dig, you're trying to go for the pieces that you need in order to like have a really strong burst turn. Since you're gonna have a 6/5 that swings, most likely it's gonna live at something. You draw the card from it. You pop it with destroy mode. You bring back Benanger, so you're always guaranteed a pilot. And then you go ahead and link that in with destroy mode, so it turns into a 7/6, and then you get to do the on-swing ability to be able to rest something, right? To either punch it with something else, or you just keep going face and get rid of blockers along the way. So it's a very, very unique list, right? And the last card I want to talk about is the Sword Strike Gundam. Sword Strike Gundam is something that my practice partner George plays a lot. It is fantastic in a rush type meta. And even if we're not in a rush type meta, it's fantastic because during Link, every time it attacks, you bounce a 2 HP unit back to your opponent's hand. So what does this target? It targets Zwart, it targets every single rush card, and you're swinging with Kira, so you're a 6/4 that reduces AP on swing by 2, which means that you get to essentially, if they try to rush you, you get to kill something. It's because they're going to have like, what, 2 AP? Okay, -2, it's you're taking no damage or 1 damage. And you're bouncing the other thing, which is going to be a vanilla. And the vanilla that, well, if they put it down again, who cares? The vanilla is most likely, unless it's called Sharzaku 2, whatever you're bouncing with this, they can't link, so they can't do anything. So they're just going to sit in the field and probably get bounced back again, unless you, as the player playing against this, have a way to answer this card. Which is still fun because, like, again, opens up the floodgates for the unicorns to come in and start trampling on the field. And I think it's a fantastic choice. I think it's a great meta call. It's a max out for absolutely good. I think this should be, like, if you want to play a white aggro, you play this card. Now, there's so many cards here actually that are really good. The last one, I swear, is Hawk of Endymion. This card, we've seen it like played as a one-of tech here and there in the earlier stages, but here this person is playing 2, and it bounces a 3 HP unit to the hand. It's on action timing, which means that technically, against the Zeon Rush deck, if they go for a Char link with the Sharzaku, either of them, you can actually respond to that attack with Hawk of Endymion during action step to return it to the hand. It's probably the only card that can save you in that scenario. That's good, right? And I don't know. It just feels like this card was being slept on. I hope we see this more in the Earth. Well, in this case, I guess it's Earth Alliance aggro, because guess what? It pairs with Sword Strike, so you can put Mulo Flaga in the Sword Strike. And you have what? You have six cards in your main deck that allow you to trigger Sword Strike. And I think that's also a really big factor because I don't think we have other good Earth Alliance pilots that work. If anything, Hawk of Endymion is still just a good card just to have against the rush, right? You get to bounce something, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like it. I like it a lot. It's one of those things where I'm pretty sure it saved this player's bacon a lot of times, and I really hope to see this, like, we start to develop into a more action step timing meta where cards like this can come out and stop an opponent's final rush turn, right? Okay, now for a more traditional list, we have the 4th place list. This has your freedoms at 2. This has the Unicorn Destroy mode, but no Unicorn. It's got 3 Benangers. I think, yeah, because Benanger also gives the most stats in general for a pilot. I think it's just good to have a lot of. It's got 3 Archangels, right? That's a pretty standard card to play for your Freedom Blocker list. It's got 1 white base, which is interesting because I think before we've only seen 5. We've seen mostly 5 bases run around in these types of lists. Then white base going to 1, yeah, it's fine. You don't really need it that early. It's a good late game. Now, the deck is also playing Strike Rouge. Strike Rouge essentially acts as a different type of Archangel where it's on the field, and it has the same effect. You have to activate a blocker on your field. It can't attack that turn. Great. I've seen this before played with like Kigali. Kigali can give this card blocker, so you swing with Rouge, and you just make it active again, right? But no Kigali here. It's just gonna be meant to help give Perfect Strike way to swing in pretty easily. You can play Lifrith, and you can actually attack with Lifrith. You can probably use the wards to pick off on those 1/2s on the field, right? You can't swing at players, but you can swing at units, so having Strike Rouge there kind of helps you at least use the blockers to do something to kind of clear the board or start poking damage turn by turn. This way it kind of accelerates the game state where you reach the point when you have Archangel and Strike Rouge and you can just swing with whatever you want. Because at that point you probably don't need to... It's 3 resources in total, I believe, to be able to activate both effects. You don't really need to be holding resources like that, especially when you don't play any action step cards. So it's a deck that's meant to be maximizing resources, which I really like. It's meant to have a nice win condition built into the deck, especially when before I would watch just the mirror match and everyone just kind of sit there until one person runs out of resources and the other person just kind of clip-clops all over them. Alright, so some numbers. The cards in the deck, right, we have about 31, 32-ish units in the deck, anywhere between 12 and 13. It's mostly, because we're playing Amuro, we're playing Kira, we're playing Benanjer, right? So we have a lot of good choices with the unit side, or sorry, the pilot side, to pair. Right? There's a lot of flexibility in those numbers, right? Theoretically, you could play Kigali as well, if you're playing Strike Rouge. So there's a lot of good... Oh, sorry, and Suleta. Let's not forget Suleta, right? Again, White has a lot of great pilots. You can't really go wrong. It just depends on how you tune the rest of the deck and what pilots can link with what units in your deck. Commands, we're starting to see that 9.8. So I think around 10 makes sense. Playing both draw cards. Some decks get to play Hakam and Endymion, which again I think it's a good sign that we're starting to see that. The bases is interesting to me because the decks at top, they're only playing 5 and 4 respectively, but the average for the bases is 5.6, right? And so that means most decks are playing 6 bases, which might be too many. And I hope they're not playing 7, but it's starting to show a little bit like heavier on the bases side, which I think that might get toned down just a little bit as we refine more lists. Or again, we might see a schism where we'll see like the blockers list play 5 or 6, but we're going to see the aggro list play 3 or 4. And I think that's going to be very interesting to monitor on that side. And then we have the average cards per level. Pretty standard stuff from what we've seen. Most of the pilots pop off on 4, Benanger's on 5. 5, you get your choice of Ale Strike, Perfect Strike, Unicorn. So we have a lot of stuff competing in that. The level 4 slot, however, level 4 I like because we have the Sword Strike. Sword Strike is probably the only level 4 that we're going to see in these lists, and it makes sense because there's nothing during that turn. I think the worst thing for this deck was that they put down Zawart, they put down Lifrith. Turn 4, what are they going to do? They put down another Lifrith or put down another Zawart, or draw 2 and pass. I think it's like you're losing momentum from there. But with Sword Strike, you're able to come in on 4 and be aggressive that turn. And I can't say enough good things about like playing that card in this type of meta because you're also disrupting your opponent. Especially, they're level 3s, level 2s. They're gonna have 2 HP. There's gonna be a target for that card to pop off. All right. So some of the breakdown for the stat lines, right? Again, stuff that we've seen before. Depending on the aggro, like we've seen the aggro list play the 2/2 Gym. That's your level 2 1-drop, right? So that's a little bit, again, leaning on the aggro side. But everything else from here, right? The 5s, the 7s, those are your big guys. And then the 4s, it was going to be the text to see if you could play Launcher Strike technically. Launcher Strike is a 3/4 blocker, or Sword Strike. Both of them we've probably seen different lists. They both cost 3. Funny because they're both technically the Strike Gundam, with different backpacks. But yeah, we see those in that list where one's more aggro, one's more defensive. The defensive side does pair better with cards like the Strike Rouge, where you have a good stat block card and it can link, and you can just reactivate it with Strike Rouge. So it really depends on like what the focus on the deck is. And again, if we get that schism between white blue aggro and white blue blockers, I might have to like split these up into 2 different classifications. All right. So from here, we covered all of the main colors that I wanted to talk about in terms of numbers. Let's talk about some of the honorable mentions. And I mentioned before, Zaft and Cyber New Types, those two decks are starting to, they have representation. They're there. They just haven't been coming out in droves like we see with the blue-white list, right? Now, red-white's interesting. Zaft is very interesting because if you look at the numbers of, like, there's so many different cards here, and the ratios is 2s and 3s are the vast majority, except for certain cards there are 4 of. And like, it's one of those decks where it really depends on what type of meta you're going into, what type of local scene you're seeing, what type of decks that you know you're going to be facing, depending on how things are progressing, at that level. Now, from here we have certain key cards, right? The Buster Gundam is probably the card that turns on all their abilities. It's support 3, which is the largest support we have right now. It also activates itself, but it cannot attack the turn, while it's paired with a coordinator, which is going to be Yazak, Atherin, or Kira. All 3 of these guys are probably the only ones that we're going to see in these type of lists, I think, because Yazak pairs with the Dual Gundam Assault Shroud, so it links it with it rather. So you want to play Yazak just because of that ability. His ability himself kind of is bad, but whatever. But the Dual Gundam Assault Shroud lets you get every single card before that card on that list, so it's level 4 and below, which is literally, like on this list is everything before that. It has so many targets in the deck. It only checks tops 3, so it does have a strong chance to whiff if you are not playing the right ratios. That's why we only see 4, well, if you count the other Assault Shrouds, that's technically 7, you don't count the one in the field. 7 units that you can't get off of it, plus all the pilots, plus the 2 commands, the only 2 commands in the deck, which are Overflowing Affection, and then the 4 bases, right? So it's very lean in terms of, we're not playing a lot of commands, we're trying to play as many pilots as possible that work, and the 4 bases that's a base that gives something breached, right? As long as there's 4 AP. So you have that, you have Buster, you're good to go. So Assault Shroud is meant to just pull out whichever card you need, and it's the ratios here are trying to maximize that potential to pull it out and play it. Other cards here, like when I mentioned Meta Call, right? Lagoi, Dual Gundam, the regular one, Blitz Gundam, Aegis Gundam, both of them. They're all situationally dependent on what's on the field. Blitz Gundam might be good because if you have something that might trade evenly with something, let's say you want to trade with like the Sword Strike, right? That's a 6/4 when it's linked. Well, you got a guy you can easily get to 5. You give it first strike, you get to trade cleanly, just kill it off. You don't even trade. You just get rid of it because it's first strike. It's such a rare ability, and you're giving it to a unit that can easily just be on demand, triggered by Buster Gundam. You have Aegis Gundam, which as soon as you pair it with Atherin, either becomes a 4/6 breach monster or becomes a 5/5 card that swings and deals 2 damage to something, right? So these cards all essentially work together where what threats are on the board come in, you play the respective threat dealer and get rid of it, but you're not trying to be too heavy, unlike maxing out cards like Lago or each of the Aegis Gundam, because they're good, but in certain matchups, right? I think MA mode's probably better against against decks that have that max out at 4 HP, right? So against rush decks would be pretty good, especially when it comes out in turn 4. Aegis Gundam is better against the blockers of the unicorn decks, right? Lagoi is just as good as Sword Strike, where it's going to just deal 2 damage to something, get rid of it, so as long as you swing at a unit on the field, but it also links with Yazak and Atherin. It's a link unit, so it's very easy to pull off. You just have to get to 5 somehow, and that somehow is with the Baku. Baku gives something is support 2. So it's like a mini Buster Gundam, but with easier to play, I guess, because it's 2/3, so it's gonna be able to not get punched in the face as easily. Or rather, if it gets punched in the face, you don't feel as bad because Buster Gundam, I feel, the 1/4 stat line kind of sucks. about it, but its pair ability is really good to kind of compensate for that. And then yeah, we got the only other 4 of here aside from the vanilla and the Assault Shroud is the other dual Gundam. It just gets breach when it has 5 AP. So when you pair Kira with it, it's gonna have breach. And 5 is really easy. You just do Baku or something, right? You play dual Gundam 1 turn, next turn play Baku. Boom, it already has breach 3. Okay. Yeah, I mean the whole deck itself, again, ratios are very fine-tuned. It's one of those decks that requires a lot of playtesting, but when it has that playtesting, it's gonna come out on top. Especially when you have like cards that can deal with certain scenarios. But you know, we'll have to see this deck progress more as we again progress through the rush meta, because now we're in that cycle. All right. So next honorable mention, we get the blue, red, blue. It's a pretty standard list, I think, at this point. I think the only new card that we see is Battle of Aces. That's going to deal 3 damage to a damaged unit. You can do it during main, you can do it during action timing. It does have a burst where you can just deal 2 damage to something. Yeah, so I think that's like the only thing that's new. Everything else here is fairly standard. We do see my favorite 3/4 Gundam instead of Star Deck Gundam. So that does have another link target for Amuro still. And I like the stat line because that means on turn 4 they can just drop the Kshatriya and the Gundam Vanillas, and they're both 3/4 stat lines, right? It's a very, very strong stat line, especially when you know that next turn you can start to ping extra damage on the field. Yeah, I mean, red blue, not much else for me to say. It's one of those decks where I think it's as good as it gets right now, and now we're just trying to see how it can deal against certain matchups. Maybe we'll see, you know, big Kshatriya go down to 3. I don't know. It's one of those things where it really depends on like who the person playing it is and what their ratios are going to be, right? Okay, and the last one is my honorable mention, the mono white deck, and this one is fantastic because one, it's the first time I've seen a list doing this replay review where it has 4 blue cards, and that's the end of my sentence. And it's Corsica base. You know, it's one of those cards that we've gotten a big rise in use this card after Eggman won that tournament, which is great. Even I put it in my deck, and I think it's just a strong card to play when you go first, right? Because if you look at this deck, look at the level 3s, right? We have Michalis and Dubalald. I butchered those names, I'm sorry. Those cards are honestly not as good as just playing Corsica base, right? The like 4/2 for the dual blob, but has a deploy ability to bounce a 1 HP card back to your opponent's hand. Personally, I think it's meant to clean up tokens, which I think is a great, like, easy removal. And then the other one is just a cheap card to play. Yeah, I don't know. It's a 3/3 stat line, and they both had the Academy trait, right? So if you don't have the Suletta, or in this case, Covert Operative, Iron Fist Discipline, those are all like pilots that have Academy traits. You don't get to link them off as easily. So I think Corsica Blaze is just a really good, just play it. Play on turn 3, don't even think about it, pass turn, right? Everything else here, there's a turn that you want to play it, there's a flow I can see. It's a little bit of a counterplay type deck where you have Choo-Choo's Demi Trainer, right? That's going to help you dig for your action step cards. So that way if your opponent tries to trade into it, you can use Iron Fist Discipline to reduce it, or Foreseen Incident, just to like kind of get a gotcha on them. So they're going to lose a guy, because 3 can clear almost anything from that stat line except for Lifrith. And then, from here we got 2/2 Vanillas, we have another 3/3 with the Academy link, we have Strike Gundam, so a lot of 3/3s all around. We do have the rare Gundam Aerial, and that reduces its cost when you have 4 commands. So that's going to come down as a 1-drop, which I think it's essentially just like a way to flood the board, right? Because it's turn 5, let's say you already went through all your actions, you can play that. Turn 5, you can play a strike. You can play 3 units that turn, I believe. And even if you pair it off with Suletta, that's still also, you can still play 3, because Aerial plus Suletta reactivates the 1 resource that you played Suletta, so you can still play the Strike Gundam, filter again. You can play the Dual Blade, the Michalis. Michalis also gets you +1 attack, right? Those are all like cards that help essentially, I would imagine that like you could kind of, if you have multiple Suletas, you can just go play a card, link with Suleta, swing, play a card, link with Suleta, swing. You know, and it does help give these squishy numbers a little bit better, right? It becomes 5/4, becomes 4/5, right? Mostly those. So I think it's kind of interesting. Man, I really hope this player has any footage of them playing, because I want to see how this deck runs in action. But aside from that, like it's probably the first mono white list I've seen top one of these events, and I think this player is going to start to try to refine it a bit more, because I think it looks really good right now, and I think it only get better. And we also have aerial rebuild here. Again, I really hope that 2 is a choice and not because of accessibility. Man, if it's accessibility, let's I hope you get the other 2, because this card is really good, needs to be maxed out. Or doesn't, if there's a reason, I love to hear it. I'm very, very open to that. And the last thing about this is not any of these cards, it's the username that played this deck. It's Grits and Gravy. Now, I had a very, very nice chuckle. My Millennium brain went, oh man, this is an amazing username. And it's an amazing username because if you hear Grits and Gravy, maybe the first thing that goes to your mind is the Chappelle Show, where in the World Series of Dice, Dave Chappelle played Grits and Gravy. Actually, was it Chappelle? It should have been Chappelle. I think Dave Chappelle played Grits and Gravy. If not, he played one of the other World Series of Dice players, because that whole skit was insane. But man, that name stuck with me ever since then. That was quite a while since I've seen that, and I love it because he has some outrageous lines like this one on the screen. I bought my mama a car and spent the rest on PCP, just like that. And please, Grits and Gravy, if you're watching, please tell me this is a Chappelle Show reference, please, because man, I was chuckling because that reference is great. But that's just me gushing for a second. All right, so we're done for the replay review for this week. I'm gonna try to get these out a little bit faster as we see the webcam locals. I believe they max out at 64 players, which is fantastic. We get a ton of good variety. Again, it's from all over the world to play, like people playing in that tournament, and we get to see all those lists immediately as soon as it's over, which I think is great for guys like me who want to look at lists and just see how people are playing, and also, like, again, we get to see how things are progressing in real time, right? And I would be very curious to see how things are progressing in other people's locals, but I know accessibility for lists, it's kind of a pain in the ass to ask people at locals to fill out deck lists every time. So this is probably going to be a good source of information for myself as well in terms of trend. But with that being said, that's it for today's replay review. If anything, I'll see you in the next one.